Hello and welcome back to Felony Spectator. I am your host, Heather. On today's episode, we're talking about the poisoning of Mary Yoder. This case is really interesting because a lot of people feel that justice wasn't served because the wrong person is in jail. I tried to be really unbiased, but I do have my thoughts. Listen carefully to everything and let me know what you think. There is a lot to consider. Mary Yoder was a well-respected chiropractor who ran a clinic with her chiropractic husband, Bill Yoder, in Whitesboro, New York. They opened the office called Chiropractic Family Care because they were passionate about helping people, and they often didn't pay themselves a decent wage just to make sure their clients got the help that they needed. This clinic was owned and operated by Bill and Mary for about 30 years. Mary and Bill also had 3 kids together, Leanna, Tamarin, and Adam. Their youngest was Adam, and he was the free spirit of the family. Leanna and Tamarin did well in school and got respectable careers, but Adam wasn't really sure what he wanted to do with his life. He did go to school, but he would enroll in programs and then quit, and enroll in another program and quit, as he kept changing his mind on what he wanted to study. In 2013, Adam worked full-time as an office manager at his parents' chiropractic clinic. But by the end of the year, he wanted to go back to school yet again, so he reduced his hours to part-time. Instead of replacing Adam at the clinic, Adam suggested that his girlfriend, Katie Conley, could work his missed hours. The plan would be that they'd both work part-time, covering the full-time position. Katie was Adam's long-term girlfriend. She was the girl next door type of girl. Plain but pretty, followed the rules, didn't party, got good grades, and often came across as shy. She grew up on a farm with horses, and most people would remember her as soft-spoken and polite. And the Yoders all really liked her as well. But the relationship between Katie and Adam was actually really rocky, and it made the Yoders slightly hesitant to hire her at the office. But Katie proved that she was a hard worker and trustworthy, so it was decided she could fill Adam's spot, as long as there was no personal conflict and the relationship issues stayed outside of work. And this wasn't too difficult for Adam. Adam was a very private person, so he wasn't one to cause drama. And Katie had always been polite and never brought up their relationship at the office. Adam continued with school. By 2014, he enrolled in even more classes. So Katie would eventually take over the role completely and worked full-time. One day, Adam did approach his parents and requested that she no longer be invited to any family events. No board game nights, no visits with his sisters, nothing. He didn't go into detail, but neither did Katie. She continued to work for the Yoders without issue, and it seemed like whatever was going on was amicable. Now, Mary worked at the office more than Bill. She was very dedicated to her patients, and she often drove out to the Amish to help them as well. She had a really big heart. Not only was Mary a helpful person, she was also an avid gardener, did pottery, and recently became a rep with the MLM wellness company called Shaklee. She often used her Shaklee products at work, like the supplements, and kept a large container of the protein powder in the fridge at work. Mary was known to be very into her health. Bill was only in the office about 1 to 2 days a week, as he had been focusing on doing the back office stuff from home. Things like payroll, accounting, and the taxes. He saw some patients, but less and less as he was focusing on retirement. Bill and Mary had also discussed selling the practice and both retiring. But the thought of selling the practice wasn't easy for them because they'd have to train their replacements, and they wanted to be picky about a buyer because they wanted their patients in good hands. This decision was especially difficult for Mary because her patients were really, really important to her, but she also liked the idea of retirement and traveling. On July 20th, 2015, Mary and her husband Bill woke up around 6 a.m. Mary was up and running around getting things organized while Bill did his morning workout. By the time he was done his workout, Mary was out the door to the office. Mary was said to be feeling healthy and happy. She kissed Bill goodbye when she left around 7:45, which she does every single morning. Bill stayed home to read the paper and have some coffee before working on things at home. When Mary arrived at the clinic, she was greeted by her receptionist, Katie Conley, who informed her that she already had patients waiting. Coworkers would remember that in the morning, Mary was her warm and friendly self. She would leave the office for lunch, but when she returned, things started to take a bit of a turn for Mary. She started to feel very sick, and she struggled with her afternoon appointments. A patient would later remember that Mary was very quiet, and typically Mary chatted with her clients, was a very active listener, and offered warm and helpful advice. But that afternoon, she seemed distracted. Another patient also remembers that Mary left the room several times and returned with no explanation, which again was very unlike her. Mary would call Bill around 6:30 from the office to tell Bill that she was coming home. She would also let him know that she wasn't feeling well at all. Bill says she sounded exhausted, and she never usually complained about being sick. So he knew she must have been feeling really bad if she brought it up during this quick phone call. Mary would get home between about 6:45 to 7 p.m. When Mary walked in, she immediately informed Bill that she was not feeling well and headed straight to the bathroom. Being sick was more of an inconvenience for Mary. This evening, she wanted to garden when she got home. It was a beautiful day and her favorite time of year. Bill and Mary were also going to talk about their planned vacation to Europe in September. Leanna, their daughter, had given them a gift of a week-long cruise for Christmas. They thought maybe they'd leave early and travel Europe and end their vacation with the cruise. But her plans would have to wait. Mary was so unwell, she could barely talk. She had been throwing up all afternoon, had diarrhea and chills. So Mary decided she would spend the night on the couch because she didn't want to wake Bill with her constant running to the bathroom. The next morning, Mary still wasn't feeling better. She was up all night, running to the bathroom, so she was just exhausted. Leanna, their daughter, was a medical doctor, so Bill called her and told her that Mary had been throwing up all night and she was quite unwell. Leanna suspected the flu or food poisoning and suggested that they could go to the emergency and get her mom some IV fluids in case she was dehydrated. So around 9 a.m., Bill and Mary were off to St. Luke's Hospital to get Mary some care. While at St. Luke's ER, the doctors gave Mary an IV and ran a few other tests. The doctors weren't exactly sure what was going on, but they gave her medication to stop the vomiting and help her with her severe stomach pains. Around 3 p.m., Mary asked Bill to go home and return with her inhaler as she was having trouble breathing. She thought maybe it was from allergies in the hospital. And Bill did. They didn't live far, so he rushed home. But when he returned with the items she requested, Mary was hooked up to a nebulizer to assist her breathing. Doctors were able to stabilize her breathing, but they informed Bill that they still really weren't sure what was going on and suggested that Mary stay overnight for observation. Bill stayed with Mary until around 7 or 8 p.m., but Mary would ask for some herbal throat drops or lozenges. Her throat was raw from throwing up. She also wanted her contact lens case, her glasses, as well as her slippers, bathrobe, and a fresh pair of underwear since she'd be staying there overnight. So for the second time, Bill left the hospital. He would go to the drugstore for the cough drops, then the house, and was back by 9 p.m. According to Bill, Mary then told him to go home. He wanted to stay overnight there with her, but she assured him that she was going to be okay and he should just go home and get some sleep. Mary also insisted that Bill not cancel her appointments. Bill didn't want to argue, so he agreed and said that he would take the morning patients but would stop by the hospital first to see how she was doing. When Bill got home, he called Leanna and updated her on Mary's condition. They were both confident by tomorrow Mary would be discharged. Bill plugged his cell phone into a charger in their spare bedroom. Bill would later explain that this was out of habit. Mary and Bill started to charge their phones in the spare room because they didn't want to be woken up with notifications or phone calls. I guess they had a family member suffering mental illness, and that family member would call and text all hours of the night. It would be speculated that Bill also turned his ringer off, which some find odd if your spouse is in the hospital, but again, that could have been out of habit. Now, Mary's condition overnight would decline. Around 7 p.m., she got up to use the bathroom and suddenly collapsed, going into cardiac arrest. Doctors revived her, but the hospital urgently tried to call Bill several times to inform him of his wife's condition. Since Bill wasn't answering the phone, the hospital would eventually send over state troopers to his house. They wanted Bill to come quickly, but they also wanted to make sure he was okay too in case Bill had caught whatever Mary had. So Bill would be woken up to banging on the front door at 5:30 a.m. State troopers informed him that he needed to call the hospital right away and that they were trying to reach him all night. He thanked them and called the hospital, where he was told to come right away to the ICU to see Mary. Now, there is discussion that Bill decided to have a shower first and pack a bag. He took over an hour to get to the hospital when they lived only about 10 to 15 minutes away. I don't know how accurate that is, but if it's true, it does give the illusion that he didn't have urgency to get to the hospital and took his time instead. When Bill did show and doctors told him Mary's condition, he seemed visibly upset. Then, while walking to the ICU, he called Leanna again. Leanna would later say that her dad seemed devastated that Mary's heart had stopped. He also had to hand the phone over to the ICU doctor so things could be explained to her in more detail because Bill was having a hard time collecting himself. After speaking with their dad that morning, Tamarin and Leanna would make the trip in to see their mother. Leanna lived in Long Island with her family, and Adam happened to be there visiting her at this time, celebrating 2 of his nieces and nephews' birthdays. Adam's plan was originally to stay a full week, and his parents, Bill and Mary, were also to arrive that weekend to celebrate the birthdays as well. When Adam learned his mom was sick, he left right away to be by his mother's side, so he would be the first sibling to arrive at the hospital. Mary would sadly go into cardiac arrest 7 more times that day, and the doctors feared the worst. Her condition was dire. Whatever Mary had wasn't like anything they had ever seen before, and it's unheard of for a person to continue to go into cardiac arrest, come back, and have normal vitals. The 7th time she went into cardiac arrest, the doctors thought she was brain dead, but by some miracle, she was responsive once again. Leanna was the last to arrive at approximately 2:23 p.m., but shortly after, Mary went into cardiac arrest for the 8th and final time. At 2:54 p.m., she would be pronounced dead. Everyone was obviously devastated. Bill doesn't remember a lot after this point. He did have some time alone with Mary to say goodbye, and he eventually left the hospital with his kids. Leanna, the oldest daughter, would bring him home, and she tried her best to comfort her dad, but Bill would spend the next little while in his bedroom crying over the loss of Mary. Another person at the hospital was Katie Conley. She was there because Adam text messaged her. He needed support, and he also thought that she might want to know what was going on since she still worked with Mary and used to be close to the family. Katie gave the family space, but Bill would vaguely remember seeing her when they left the hospital. Before they left, doctors would also inform Bill that they would need to do a full autopsy. The hospital had a liability to do one because Mary had fallen while she was there. Had she passed away without incident, no autopsy would have been requested. But because she fell, the hospital needed to make sure she didn't die because of that fall. Bill was said to be 100% on board for an autopsy. He wanted to know what happened, and he made it clear that the entire family wanted to know as well. Now, lots of people have a hard time with that decision because the thought of their loved ones being opened up and further examined is very upsetting. They prefer their loved ones to rest in peace. Bill, however, was very cooperative and had no issues with the matter. After the autopsy was performed, Mary's remains were then sent to a local funeral parlor and cremated. Some people have suggested that Bill rushed this process and had her cremated as soon as he possibly could because he was hiding something. I have also read that it was actually Leanna who arranged the cremation after speaking with the medical examiner's office, because Bill was still handling Mary's death pretty badly. He would say things like, how was he going to go on without her, or that he didn't want to be here anymore. Leanna would eventually suggest that he speak to someone else who's lost a spouse. She told her dad to reach out to her aunt Kathleen. Kathleen was Mary's sister, and she had lost her husband the previous year. Now, Bill did reach out, but we'll talk more about this later. Meanwhile, Leanna would call family and friends to let them know of Mary's passing. When asked how Mary died, according to Mary's other sisters, Leanna started telling people Mary passed due to ascending cholangitis. In simple terms, it's the inflammation of the bile duct and can be life-threatening. A lot of the symptoms were very similar to what Mary went through. Some of Mary's sisters thought this was strange because Mary was a very healthy person. Even though it seemed strange, they didn't doubt it because if that's what doctors said, then that's what it probably was. Now, in reality, the medical examiners had ruled her death unknown, pending toxicology. With that said, the first question most people ask is how when someone healthy passes away? Perhaps Leanna told people she suspected this, and the sisters have twisted her words. Mary's sisters have some very strong opinions as well that we will get into. Now, the extensive tests that toxicology did wouldn't come back for at least 8 weeks. But looking at Mary's tissues and organs, it looked like Mary had been poisoned. So the medical examiner would contact poison control for help and test for things like cyanide, arsenic, and other more well-known poisons. Strangely, those tests came back all negative. Things were starting to look bleak because they were also running out of blood samples. So doing further tests needed to be carefully thought out as to not waste what little blood they had left. Another poison control expert was sent the medical examiner's findings and the medical history, and it was this expert who suggested colchicine poisoning. It seemed random at the time because colchicine is a drug used for people with serious gout. It is very strong and can be very lethal. Basically, the difference between a therapeutic dose prescribed by a doctor for people who need it and a toxic dose is very small. The margin of error is quite tiny. Signs of colchicine overdoses include stomach pains, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. It lowers the body's ability to make new blood cells, can result in poor kidney function, muscle pain, weakness, tingling of the fingers and toes, bruising, bleeding, sore throat, fever, chills, paleness, and slowed breathing. Basically all the things that Mary went through. Now, the Yoders were doctors, so it would have been easy enough for them to order this medication, but as far as anyone knew, they didn't. It wasn't necessary for their clinic as none of their patients had gout, nor did they treat people with gout. They also didn't order a lot of medications in general because they had a more holistic approach. Mary had a lot of herbal supplements to sell, but they didn't keep a lot of pharmaceutical-grade medicines. Since Mary's death seemed very similar to a toxic dose of colchicine, as a last resort, her remaining blood would be tested. The test would come back positive. It was also discovered that Mary had 15 times the lethal dose of colchicine in her system, so this was clearly intentional. The question now was, how did Mary get a lethal dose of colchicine into her system? Bill, at this point, was still very depressed. He had stopped working at the office and asked another doctor to take over while he was mourning his wife. Bill said that he was very confused by everything. Right before Mary died, they had discussed selling the chiropractic business again. They wanted to travel and enjoy retirement while they were still relatively young. Now, I don't know if this is true or if it matters, but I have read that they didn't have life insurance policies. Bill was a beneficiary of Mary's estate and vice versa, but there wouldn't have been an insurance payout upon Mary's death as far as I know. It is rumored that Bill was worried about retirement because he didn't think they had enough money. And this was something one of Mary's sisters claims Bill to have said to her. Now remember, they weren't chiropractors for the money and often underpaid themselves just to make sure their patients could get treatments. Life to them was helping people. Now that they were close to retirement, it became a concern for Bill. But would that be a reason for Bill to want Mary dead? According to Sharon, one of Mary's sisters, she was the one to call the sheriff's office on October 15th because she suspected that this was intentional and unlikely that Mary did it to herself. With that said, medical examiners did rule her death a homicide, so police had to get involved. But nobody knew how this happened. Everybody loved Mary. She didn't have any enemies. Her clients adored her. Her staff got along great with her. Her neighbors and friends also really liked her. Investigators told the Yoders not to tell anyone about the suspected poisoning. Any leak on how Mary died could compromise the investigation. Now, keeping this a secret could also be the reason why Leanna told family that she died of something else, because she needed to keep it quiet. The FDA would take Mary's supplements, the food at the office, including her protein powder and almond milk, as well as other items to see what was contaminated. Now, strangely, it was Bill and Adam who collected these items, not the police. Now, why Bill and Adam and not the police? The only reason I can think of is that police didn't have a warrant to collect these items. So perhaps Bill and Adam were volunteering these items to be tested to help out. Bill handed over Mary's supplements from the home, but it said some things have been unaccounted for. Mary's weekly pill organizer, her inhaler, and the cough drops Bill brought to the hospital. Bill would later say he wasn't sure where those items were. The hospital gave him a bag of Mary's things, but he couldn't remember what was inside. It's also possible the hospital threw away her cough drops. Adam would go to the office with his ex-girlfriend Katie to collect the almond milk, protein powder, and a few more other things. According to Adam, he just started to throw anything and everything into a box to be tested. He was desperate to know how this happened. Katie thought he was going a bit wild, wanting to test things that she thought was pointless. Now let's remember Katie did work there full-time at the office, so maybe she had a good point that he was collecting things that didn't make sense. She would have a good understanding of what Mary would come in contact with, but Katie also touched and used many of these same things, so some would argue that she was just trying to protect herself. Adam thought Katie wasn't being helpful or supportive, and they would have an argument about what should be and shouldn't be tested. This bothered Adam a lot, and it made him question their relationship once again. They would continue this fight via text message throughout the evening. Katie didn't like Adam's anger at the office, and Adam didn't like her attitude. Adam decided that since Katie was also seeing someone else, there was no point in remaining friends, and they stopped talking. Now, Katie and Adam have always had a very tumultuous relationship. They met at a high school grad party in 2011. At the party, they thought there was a spark right away, and within 4 months, they were exclusive. Adam adored her and even wrote a book of poetry dedicated to Katie. Katie was also very much in love, but they fought, and it was just as intense as their love for each other. They would say very hurtful things and had very loud screaming matches. They would break up and get back together again several times over the years. They had been broken up prior to Mary's passing, and they only started talking again because Adam texted Katie from the hospital. We will go into more detail on their relationship in a bit because I want to talk about another relationship that happened after Mary passed. Bill and Kathy, or Kathleen as we referred to her earlier. Kathy was Mary's oldest sister. Bill and Kathy started to develop feelings for each other after Mary passed away. Now, it's possible the relationship started prior to Mary's passing, as I have read a neighbor was sure they had seen Bill outside kissing Kathy just days before Mary had gotten ill. By most accounts, however, Bill reached out to Kathy at the suggestion of his daughter because he needed someone to talk to who had also gone through losing their spouse. Bill was feeling very alone, and it turned out Kathy was very easy to talk to and very empathetic. Bill and Kathy would start to spend a lot of their time together. Bill's sadness from losing Mary didn't seem to stop him from seeing Kathy, which seemed suspicious to the other sisters. And having a new relationship wouldn't look good, but they were simply leaning on each other's shoulders. Bill was very sad, and Kathy was the only one who knew how he felt. And let's not forget, Kathy also lost her sister, so they were both really sad. Now, Bill's assumption was true. He was the primary suspect in the beginning. Bill didn't really have an alibi that day when Mary became ill. He wasn't at the office that day, and nobody knew where he was. So Bill would be brought to the station and questioned, where he gladly handed over his phone, iPad, and the office computers. Investigators would note that Bill still had all the communication to Kathy on his devices and hadn't deleted anything from before Mary passed away. He was seemingly hiding nothing. In Bill's phone, they would see all sorts of text messages between Bill and Kathy, but they also would see how the relationship developed. So it didn't start off with, Mary is dead and now we can be together. Instead, it started off like friends. There was no indication that they had any type of relationship prior to Mary passing. They'd see how Bill and Kathy would slowly start to call each other honey. Then they'd talk about how it was nice to see each other. And then they'd start going on dates and eventually be sexual in their messages. So there was definitely a progression in their relationship. Investigators would also find out that early in September, Bill went to see his doctor about an eating disorder. His medical records would indicate that he spoke of having issues with stress of the passing of Mary and his new girlfriend, not a girlfriend that he had before Mary passed. Police concluded that while it seemed perhaps in bad taste for Bill to move on with Mary's sister, it wasn't completely suspicious. Bill would later testify that he was really sad and depressed that Mary had passed so suddenly, that he saw life as fragile. You just never know when you're going to die, so when he started having feelings for Kathy, he acted on them. Looking back, maybe he was being impulsive, but life is short. He also said that time felt like it was going really slowly, so to him, it didn't seem quick that him and Kathy started dating. Some people thought they might have moved too fast, but for him, life was dark and time was standing still. Kathy was helping him out of a very dark place. Bill would still be a suspect, so police wanted to know more about Bill and Mary's marriage. They asked Katie to come to the station to talk to them because they wanted insight into what it was like working for both Bill and Mary. Katie had worked for them for over 4 years, so maybe she had noticed something. And Katie was very happy to help and came into the station several times to discuss many things. Around the third interview, she started to imply that she thought it wasn't Bill, but they should actually be looking at Adam. Apparently, he wasn't acting like himself. Then, on November 23rd, 2015, an anonymous letter came into the medical examiner's office that had information related to Mary's death. On the same day the medical examiner got a letter, the Oneida County Sheriff's Office got the exact same letter. You can pause to read, but this letter blatantly said it was Adam Yoder who was responsible for the murder of Mary. Adam did it because he felt like he wasn't getting enough attention by his family. He also thought he would get some sort of inheritance, but when Adam didn't get any inheritance, he said he wished he could take it back. It went on to say that he ordered the toxin online and put it in one of Mary's vitamins the last time he was at his parents' home. Adam had also told the anonymous writer of the letter exactly where the toxin was. The letter identified the toxin as colchicine and that the rest of it was under the front passenger seat of his Jeep and was going to stay there until Adam figured out what to do with it. Now, whoever wrote this letter obviously was very close to Adam. They knew details in which the family were all told to keep a secret, and it seemed like Adam really trusted this person if he told them that he did it. Adam was immediately brought in for questioning, and of course, he denied any involvement in his mother's death. He loved her. He claims he didn't know about any inheritance, and he would never kill his mother for money. The allegations were absurd to him. When asked if police could search his Jeep, he would first consult an attorney. After consulting an attorney, Adam allowed the police to search his Jeep because he said he had nothing to hide. So he agreed that he would be cooperative. So Adam stood back and watched while the search went underway. Unfortunately for Adam, investigators would find the bottle of colchicine wrapped in cardboard under the passenger seat, just like the letter explained. Adam was shocked. He told the police there was no way he would have let them search his Jeep if he knew it was there. He felt like he was being framed. Other incriminating items found in his Jeep was a receipt for the drug that referenced a Google email account, mradamyoder@gmail.com, gloves, goggles, and a mask, which could have been used to handle the toxin. As far as I could find, there wasn't any colchicine found on the gloves or the mask, and Adam later identified those items as his. Adam was now at the top of the suspect list because they learned that Adam had owed Katie quite a bit of money, so the inheritance theory made some sense. A month prior to Mary's death, Katie texted Adam with the message, $22,839.99, ASAP. This was the amount of money that Adam owed Katie. If Adam thought there was an inheritance, he might have motive to get money to pay Katie back. He was also suffering depression from his constant on and off relationship with Katie, so maybe he thought paying her back would make his life better. Now, this amount was actually high. Adam believed the amount to be closer to $15,000, but Katie said that she had added compounded interest, which was never agreed to. Adam had borrowed money to buy his used Jeep and pay off some student loans. He claims that he didn't ever want to borrow it, but Katie offered and insisted as a favor when they were still together. He figured if they were going to build a relationship together, he could trust her. But now that they were broken up, she wanted it all back and then some. According to Adam, he claims he didn't care about owing Katie money and would never kill anyone to pay her back. Adam insisted he was being framed, and the only person in Adam's life that caused him any sort of conflict was his on and off ex-girlfriend, Katie Conley. She was also the only person in his life who knew that his mother had ingested a toxic dose of colchicine. We're going to stop here for today and make this a 2-part episode because there's still a lot of information. But I'm curious to know what you think so far. Thanks again for joining me here at Felony Spectator, and we'll see you again very soon.